My name is Drew Jones of Drewsguitarshop in Seattle, Washington, and I'm making this video here to talk about this 1950s Grestch ukulele. I get instruments in here on trade once in a while. My primary business is repair, though. When I get these instruments on trade, they're generally as a partial payment for a job, or sometimes a complete payment for a job that I've got in here from a customer. This instrument came in from a customer who typically pays me in ukuleles, weirdly. He's brought me trash bags of ukuleles of varying qualities. This is kind of one of the more mid-range ones that he's brought me. It's a great sounding little instrument, and I gotta say, you know, as far as soprano ukuleles that I've messed around with, this is much more volume than I'm used to. It also has kind of a little bit more kick to it. So a little bit more of that attack that I'm used to, you know, coming from like a concert size. But yeah, it's a pretty cool instrument. Overall, these Grestch ukuleles are made of solid wood, solid mahogany, and you know, the build quality is really good on these. Obviously, Grestch is more known for their guitars than they are for their ukuleles, but these were a fairly popular ukulele back in the days that this was made. So back in the 1950s, you would have seen this in the hands of somebody who was a fairly skilled player. Now, that being said, these old ukuleles at this point have a number of issues that are kind of associated with them. And I wanted to first state that all of those issues that I'm about to talk about have been fixed on this, and so they aren't something you have to worry about. And I'll also say that one of the biggest things that I run into with customers here buying vintage instruments, not instruments that I'm selling, but instruments that I get brought in, is that people will oftentimes like find something on Reverb or Craigslist or eBay or whatever, and they'll say, "Oh yeah, I got this great deal on this old vintage Gibson," and you know, they'll say, "Well, I'm getting it. I'll bring it in next week." And then I bring it in, and I'm like looking at it, and I'm going, "Oh, I know why this was only $500. This is going to need like $1,100 in repair work to really get it playing again." And that's a pretty typical thing with older instruments. If you're like an old classic car guy, or you're an old, you know, if you're into like vintage bicycles, you know that if you get something that's got some age in it, it means that that thing may have some maintenance that needs to be kind of caught up on. And guitars, ukuleles, any of these instruments are no different. So, you know, when you look at one of these things, you got to realize that like a lot of the folks that are selling these don't work on them, and a lot of the folks that are selling these are you know, kind of selling them as is. The instruments that I sell have had all of their bugs ironed out and have been gone through, and the common things that you find wrong have been fixed, and so that's going to be common to basically every instrument that I sell here. So let's go ahead and kind of talk about some of the issues that these instruments typically have and ones that have been fixed. So one issue is that the strings on these have generally kind of pulled the neck forward a little bit on them, and there's a little bit of warping that's going on as a result of there just being tension on there for many years, which results in the need for a neck reset, because oftentimes what you'll see is really high action and kind of a low bridge. This one, you can see that the action on it is pretty nice. It's very low. It's in fact where I'd want to see it for a new instrument. This setup on here is very, very comfortable, low, with no buzzing. It's ideal. This is what I would be putting on a new instrument. Something else that is often wrong with these is that a lot of these ukuleles came with a wooden nut, and that wooden nut is worn through a lot of times. That's been fixed. I replaced this with a custom bone nut. When I carve these in the shop here, I'm carving them with this guy here and a solid block of bone, and so they're custom made for this specific instrument. I'm not using pre-made things that aren't going to quite fit on the neck as far as like, you know, string spacing and everything. This string spacing is going to be perfect for this neck. Something else that is often wrong with these instruments is that the tuners are oftentimes kind of worn out. This instrument came to me with no tuners, but I was able to find some retro you know, replacements that are the original design that this had, which actually look really, really nice on there. The only thing that I might say about these is that if you want them to look even more vintage than they are currently, they can be stained, and if that's something that a customer wants before they buy this instrument, I'm willing to do that. Or you can do it yourself with some, tea or coffee or whatever you want to use, because it's plastic and it's a little porous, so it'll absorb a little bit of that stuff. But the tuners work great, which is really, really nice when it comes to old ukulele friction tuners like this, because these oftentimes don't work so nice. So very cool. I can also replace these tuners if somebody wants to put some geared ones on there, but these work just fine. One of the other things that's wrong with these a lot of times is that the bridges have kind of worn out. The bridges in a lot of these old ukuleles have a sort of saddle that's made of wood. It's built in as part of the bridge. That oftentimes has little cracks and divots and dents in it that kind of make the action kind of uneven or buzzy in places. This bridge in particular was very damaged when I originally got this instrument, and so I just went ahead and pulled that thing off wholesale. I also ended up moving the bridge a little bit. I'll get to that in a second here, but putting the new bridge on here basically enabled me to do two things. It enabled me to put a bridge on here with a really solid glue joint, one that I trust because I did it myself, and also enabled me to put something in that has an adjustable saddle, which is nice, so that if you need to go up or down with the string height, you can with this saddle, as opposed to something that has the built-in saddle where you're kind of stuck with what you got. So yeah, that's a thing that's already done. The reason that I moved the bridge back on this, away from the neck, is because one of the things that's kind of peculiar about ukuleles is that oftentimes the bridges are glued in the wrong spot. One of the most common calls that I get here is, "Hey, I have a ukulele and my intonation is off," and my response is always the same: "Of course it's off. It's a ukulele." I mean, it's going to be off because they all are off a little bit. By characteristic of like the string pull, the string gauges that we're dealing with, these are hard instruments to intonate already. But to top that off, most of the instruments that I see built don't have compensation built in. Now, when we do a guitar build, we take our scale length and we go from the nut to the 12th fret, and then we go from the 12th fret to the bridge. Now, on paper, by rule of 12ths, mathematically, that should be the same measurement. However, that mathematical on paper thing doesn't take into account the fact that these strings have a little bit of tension in them, and that affects things, and that the strings have height, and that affects things. And so we end up doing this thing called compensation, which means that we move the bridge back a little bit from where it would be on paper. Usually that's somewhere around the neighborhood of around a 16th of an inch or so. On these little guys, sometimes that needs to be a lot more, because sometimes I'll see bridges kind of glued a little bit forward, which is kind of the case with this one here. This one was glued a little far forward. And so I ended up moving this one back so that we can intonate it properly. So, pretty good. So one of the other things that helps the intonation on this instrument is that with the change out of the bridge here, gluing on this more modern bridge, I was able to actually do a bone saddle, which is my preference. Bone has a little bit more attack than typical wood ones do. But it means that I was able to custom intonate this instrument. And so if you look at the pattern that's on top of the saddle and the way that the strings crown on it and sit on that crown, there are different contact points for each string, which means that there's special compensation for each of these strings and the tension that they pull, which means that each of these strings has the best intonation that it can have. Acoustic instruments are never going to have perfect intonation, but this gets pretty close. So, as far as intonation on ukuleles like this here, this is going to have really good intonation, and if that is a problem that you have had on instruments in the past, this may be one that you're interested in just for that fact alone. Also went ahead and repaired all of the little cracks that it had, because those are really common to run into on these little guys. These, this is an instrument that people kind of treat as a little travel thing, and so, these things kind of get exposed to all sorts of weather. Usually you're not going to find an old vintage ukulele without any like cracks or stuff like that going on. It's just not a thing that happens, because they all kind of go around. They go to the park, they go to the beach, they go to school. You know, these are the things that you drag with you to the party that you're going to go drink at. You know, I've encountered a number of these that have been sat on or stepped on by drunk people at parties. So, you know, it's a thing. But yeah, this one was in pretty good shape. It only had one crack down here that's been cleated and repaired. Well, 2 cracks. There's another one here, and that one has also been cleated and repaired. And the braces are all hanging on just fine, tested and true. And yeah, all in all, this thing is a really solid instrument. You're going to be hard pressed to find a ukulele with all of the modifications that have been done to this one to improve it. And I guess the last improvement that I'll talk about is that I went through and I did a level crown and polish on these frets. Now that's not quite a refret, but what it means is that I took the existing frets and I took the tops off of them to get them level again, after making sure that they were all glued down. And then I went ahead and took a file and I rounded them over so that they're nice and round and crisp on top. So there's a little tiny contact point on the very top that the string comes in contact with, and that helps the intonation and helps the tone. It also means that you're not nicking up your strings with any kind of sharp corner on those frets. But yeah, that's what got done here. And you know, it means that you've got low action with no buzzing all the way up and down. So very cool. It's got great tone. It's got a great patina on it. It's got the look, it's got the feel, it's got the sound. And if you're looking for something like that, this instrument is going to serve you really, really well. Anyway, this has been Drew Jones of Drew's Guitar Shop in Seattle, Washington. If you are interested in buying this instrument, there's a link to the Reverb ad in the description where you can find this instrument for sale. If it is going to a non-active listing, it means the instrument is already sold, but I may have other ukuleles here, so if you want to give me a call, I might have something for you anyway. All the instruments that I do have similar work done to them, all the things ironed out, improvements done, etc. There's also a link in the description to my Ko-Fi and my Patreon. There's also a link down there to my website where you can find my contact information as well as my pricing page for getting repair work done if you need repair work done, or you want to talk to me about intonation on your uke and how to fix it. And there's also a page on my website that I wrote for caring for stringed instruments, so hopefully you might be able to avoid some of the little cracks and dings and stuff that this instrument has, and like most instruments that come into the shop have. So yeah, anyway, this has been Drew Jones of Drew's Guitar Shop in Seattle, Washington, showing off 1950s Grestch ukulele. And I'll go ahead and I'll play you out.